Okay, so I'm going to give a quick talk on how we see the direction of blockchain and where we think it's going, and that in turn will say why we are developing something called Konsent. So since I only have about 15 minutes, I'm going to start it off 2,500 years BC and take it from there. So this is a picture from Sumer, now Iraq, where they had big temples and people would come and give tribute. So they would give grain, livestock, and so on. And the priests would have a big feast, but if it was a bad year, they then contribute back to their to the populace. So this was kind of a society in the making. This was before we had the written language. So someone came up with the idea that if they took kind of just a grain, and then had a line, and they added lines, then they could know how much grain they had in inventory. And this was the invention of logging. And we as a society has really taken to this concept. It is more or less what makes our society. It's logging and lists. So these are some of the examples of what we use lists for. It's who owns the company, who's employed in that company, it's everything, it's the essence of it. So these lists with the relationships economically and socially that we have is the essence of society. So if we start 2,500 BC, empires came, empires fell, and then we started with chiefdoms, the small kind of settlements. These were then turned into kingdoms, which later were turned into nations, and then unions like the African Economic Union or the EU or the USA. We also have banks, which was then put under central banks, which now is put under a central bank like the central bank of the EU. And all of this is because we converge towards centralization. These lists that we have, they are hard to organize. So what we do is that we put a new thing on top of the hierarchy every time it becomes hard. So the banks in the start was easy to organize, but with enough banks you needed a central bank. With enough central banks you needed a new central bank on top of that. So along the x-axis there you don't only have time, you also have centralization, right? So that means that we can kind of pick a y-axis with decentralization going upwards. And that makes blockchain go up there. And this is why blockchain is so hard to kind of just put into our regular concepts. Because for 4,000 years, we have been moving in one direction. And now this comes along, and then we say, how can we just apply this to what we currently have, like supply chains? How can we apply it? And this is the challenge. So what we believe is that if we start on the far right there and kind of use blockchain there, where it's not too much ingrained in society, we believe that's where we can make the biggest impact. And that in turn will kind of drag the other parts up towards decentralization. I don't know how far we'll go here. Some people are saying that maybe nations don't make sense in the future. I don't know about that. But my belief is that we kind of will move this way from the right and backwards. And I also believe that this is the reason that Bitcoin has had troubles kind of reaching their value proposition, because they have attacked central banks, saying that they are going to become the new gold standard, and they have attacked banks, saying that you can be your own bank and you don't need banking anymore. And if you see it kind of going from the right and towards the left, that going towards the banks is really hard, because that's 700 years of history, which is what you're trying to disrupt. So with that said, we are building something called Konsent. And Konsent is a membership registry. We believe that part of the modern bureaucracy, you have things like shareholders registries, membership registries, supply chains, and so on, and we believe these are the areas where it's easy to see the value of blockchain and actually put it into motion. So today, there are a lot of organizations. All of us Norwegians are part of like 5 organizations, Red Cross, labor unions, and so on. And each of them have a database where they store all your data, and kind of 15 people just organizing these lists. But it doesn't look like this. It looks more like this. So if you change your email or your phone number or something more advanced changes, then you have to change that with every organization, and that doesn't happen. So the data here becomes better and better over time, worse. So what we propose, or what we're making, is that the user owns its own data, like in self-sovereign identity, which you can hear more about from Datum, who's here, and Uport, who's also here. So this is seen from one user, and for every user, there's generated one new database between that organization and that user. So if you personally are a member of 5 organizations, then there will be created 5 virtual databases. And this goes for every member. So there's going to be a lot of databases. And this is where Konsent comes in and kind of organizes it so that it seems like one database for the organization, and it seems like just the user's data from the user's point of view. There's a feature in smart contracts that's something called Boolean questioning, where you don't have to give the actual information. You can just ask a smart contract a question, and it can answer. The typically situation where this is told is kind of if you're going to buy beer, could you, instead of showing your license, just be queried, are you allowed to buy beer, or are you over 18 years old? And the smart contract can just respond yes or no without showing the actual birth certificate or anything to prove it. We take this concept, this is the example. We take this concept to the Konsent platform. That means that you can just, as an organization, ask, do you have better data out there on these users? And the system can answer back without knowing the data, but because other organizations have stored other data, that probably this data can be improved. So therefore, our dashboard for the membership registry looks like this. This is kind of the regular system that they would have today, with just all of their users and members and their data. So you have the data quality assumption on the top, and querying the smart contract, you can probably increase this to 89%. Now, if the organization was to push this button, a push notification would be sent to the user to ask, will you allow this organization to read these data points? Because that will increase their data quality. And the user, of course, is the one who decides and can say yes or no, depending on whether he wants to. So our platform gives more correct data, more up-to-date data, greater granulation on the data. It's GDPR compliant from the bottom up. This means that kind of we looked at GDPR, and if you take the values from GDPR and just apply it on a new system without trying to apply GDPR to an old system, this is what we believe that looks like. You, as a user, own all your data, and that's the important part. And we have a working prototype on the stands, and I hope you all want to come out and try it, where you have the cell phone and the user and the membership registry. It's all working. But before you ask, is this on the blockchain? No, it's not on the blockchain yet. So we have a working prototype on the office with blockchain, but that solution is not that sexy to look at. It's like you can see the blocks moving around, but it's sluggish and it doesn't work as it's supposed yet. So our prototype here today shows the flow in a most easy way to understand, and then we will slowly implement the blockchain as part of that. This is a quote by Vitalik Buterin, who made Ethereum. And he's saying that if cryptocurrency succeeds, it's not because it empowers better people, it's because it empowers better institutions. And if that is true, if it's not just about having kind of a currency that you can move between people, but it's about how we organize institutions, how we organize our society, then it means that this is not a solution that's kind of, you have either the correct one, you just have to implement it, or you have a wrong solution, but you don't use that one. But it's cultural, right? Because institutions are part of our culture. So in Silicon Valley, they love blockchain, but they love it for another reason that we do in the Nordic countries. So when they talk about government, then they wriggle their nose and they say, fucking government, and they hate it. So they want to use blockchain to kind of disrupt the whole way and create a direct connection between the user and the company. And what they hate even more than their own government is the EU with GDPR. So if Facebook is able to kind of create a direct connection with their users and then avoiding GDPR, that would be excellent for them. And in the autocratic countries like Russia and China, they also love blockchain, but for totally other reasons. They want to use blockchain for greater control and greater understanding of the economy, and then controlling it, of course. In Norway and in the Nordic countries, we can't just sit on our asses and wait for solutions in Silicon Valley to be developed and to be imported to Norway, like we did with Web 2.0, with our Twitters and Facebooks. We have to actively build blockchain solutions, institutions, that is working the way that we want with the values that we have. Thank you.